You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Have you ever wished that you could just hear the clear and present sign? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be cast by the breath of a lion? Well, we're going to talk about all of that and more as we continue on our walk through Narnia. I am one of your hosts. I am Joe, and I am joined this time by Pastor Will. How are we doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you on this particular episode. I love these Narnia books, and going back and rereading these stories was super, super fun. And yeah, I'm Will Rose. I'm your one of your co-hosts, and my new nickname is Wilbo Baggins that TJ gave me not too long ago, and I'm going to embrace that and take and run with it. So don't be surprised if you hear me introduce myself as Wilbo Baggins in the future.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm curious, is this a book that you were exposed to younger, or what is your history with the Narnia? Refresh my memory.
Yeah. So I was introduced to them at a very young age. My church had a library in it. And so when I was a kid, I remember like in the summer in elementary school, my mom taking me by the church library and trying to pick out books for me to read over the summer. And I was just like, no, I don't like reading. I want to read comic books and look at surfing magazines. But the original cover to like the original book of The Silver Chair had like this guy smashing a chair with a sword. And I was like, whoa, that looks like a fantasy story. So I grabbed that particular book off the shelf and tried to read as a kid, but I was just not a strong reader. But when the Narnia cartoon came out on like the CBS special when I was a kid, I loved the story of Aslan. And I don't know if I soaked up the Christian allegory at that point, but just the fantasy story and talking animals I loved. And then eventually when I started reading a little bit more, when I caught the bug of reading and enjoying reading late in high school, early college, gravitated towards C.S. Lewis's work, his theology, Mere Christianity. And then as a camp counselor one summer, I took the Narnia books and the Lord of the Rings with me to camp, because that was a time before cell phones and scrolling and all that stuff. I was just going to be stuck in my cabin, with kids and had my free time would be on my own. And so I took those books and reread them all through the summer. And it was a very magical time in my life and formation in terms of leadership and faith. So they had a very big impression. And The Silver Chairs was one of the first books that I remember my mom just kind of put me saying, why don't you try this one? But enjoyed all of them. As I reread them in college.
So when I first interacted with Narnia past just The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I was laid up with an injury. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I got I got my hands on the first one, and I ended up powering through the entire series pretty quick. And it's interesting when you're in a circumstance where like you get to string together a dedicated season of time, air quotes, to read a story like this, to experience a story like this, because it is what it is. Like from the beginning of this series, with every other voice that I've been sitting with, along the way, we keep talking about this idea of reflections of truth. And we get to this part of the Narniad. Yes, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is what it is, but this is where you really get into reflections of really key concepts and ideas. And I'm thankful that getting into this stage, because we're almost done now, going through after this, we've got one more, jumping into this part of the discussion, that I'm with somebody that is more prone to allowing the questions, allowing the media to ask the questions, right? We talk about exploring the deeper ideas behind these things. And in this particular case, when we talk about these different things like kingdom, when we talk about these things like having a relationship with God and all of that kind of stuff, some of those very building blocks that are involved in that one with what we're talking about, with what that means, are conveyed within the story that, like you said, is still a really good story, even past all of the tones and all of the ideas and all of the ideals. Like, for the people that are into this style of fantasy storytelling, Narnia is top of the class.
Right.
I don't put Lord of the Rings in the same style of fantasy as this in particular, so I don't necessarily that's a different conversation to juxtapose
Right.
those two things. But I think for what it is, Narnia does it best, and we get to see that through really good storytelling and these ideas that I mean, even you said you read these things and you read something that's so close to the source material in concept from the voice of somebody like a Lewis, and you see that put in practicality. It does have an effect on forming you and shaping and the way your brain processes and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and just the way, and I know there was kind of a rivalry or friendly accountability between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis in terms of allegory or not, and for children or not, or what's for adults and those kinds of things. But really, like, if you're starting with, if you're diving into Narnia, yeah, is for a younger audience. But as the story moves along, it becomes more complex and more nuanced. So I think of like how the Harry Potter books went from he was a small kid and was a little bit more lighthearted, and as the books went on, it became dark because it became older. And same way with like Star Wars, as it went along, it became more dark and more nuanced and complex, and the universe grows. And here, as you're moving into the Silver Chair and other Narnia books, as you move along towards the end, they do become a little more nuanced, a little bit more complex. But those signs, holding up the mirror of what life is and what our deepest desires are and what our deepest longings are for, helps bring that up to the surface to examine a little bit more. Which is why at that time in my life in college, when I was rereading these and paying attention a little bit more to the nuance and understanding the theological concepts, the philosophical concepts, the questions that they're wrestling with. Man, I was going back and look at some of the books that I actually read in college, and what I was underlining and writing in the margins, and what stuck out to me was like a time capsule of Will when he was 20 some years old, and it's kind of beautiful to see. And so that was kind of fun.
That's funny
to relook at that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah. I look at this kind of story. I think it's interesting that you use some of the verbiage that you do, because getting into the story here a little bit, we're picking up with Eustace and Jill. And Eustace, we talked about heavily last episode, because that's his big, transformational moment. It's, that he is the star character of that moment. And now we see that, that's new shades of that same kind of character type on Jill, as
right.
We see Eustace, starting to coach her, I guess, be there with her. You still see these images of, in the beginning of the story, the characters were a little bit more archetypal, right? Like they're, Peter is supposed to be this, Susan is supposed to be this, so on and so forth. It really does feel like with the introduction of Eustace, that's where you start to get a little bit more human characters in the series, and that have, like, I guess, a shade of gray to them, as much as you do in the Narniad. You know what I mean? I understand, but I still think that while the action is not nearly as impactful, I do think the morality tale of where the people are at, I think that's where the weight is more of a 1-for-1 comparison.
Yeah, because at the end of Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Edmund and Lucy are told they can't come back, right, or they aren't coming back, and there's a different new story for them moving on. But now this one, Eustace has his story and he's brought back. And I love, the part of the beginning of these books are just so awesome because how C.S. Lewis draws people back into Narnia. You started with a wardrobe, and then you had different creative means by which they're being pulled back into this particular universe, magical land. And here you have another example of Eustace sharing his testimony. Are you going to believe me or not? Are you going to think I'm crazy or not? And then Jill and him are actually pulled into Narnia and then trying to figure out what that means. And we get to look through someone brand new to Narnia, see through her eyes, what she believes or doesn't believe, or what she's wrestling with, what really is lying before her or not. And then Eustace being able to coach her, understand because he's been there before, and but also bring her along, and they kind of have a team up and adventure along the way.
Yeah. It stuck out to me when reviewing for the episode that we see the end of Voyage of the Dawn Treader taking place in Aslan's country, not just Narnia. And we see the pickup when they enter back in, it is into Aslan's country specifically versus going back into Narnia. And
right.
It's an interesting pickup that's where the story begins, and when starting from that point, that you go into the first interaction between Jill and Aslan, and this to me is like theological cotton candy, because it's such a flagrant reflection of truth. Like, everybody and their mother understands what at least to some layer, that there is subtext to what's being said here. Now we get into the theological discussions and the actual stuff at some point, but the fact that this is willing to humanize that a representation of that initial contact of thinking we understand, but then understanding that the thing has known us before it was calling out to us first, and all of that. The way that's conveyed here is so human, and stops to consider, in stage acting, they call it stopping to smell the roses. You stop and you let the moment breathe, and that moment breathes in this book, that I think is something special to be considered, because yes, there is the fantasy element, but again, past that surface layer of the fantasy element is this truth of now understanding, that relationship and that interaction point, and thinking about where, where that relationship started. Has that relationship started? And you spin off into the questions that you should be asking yourself as you poke and prod and push at the dimensions of what this reality makes sense about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's good. And that initial encounter, what's the reaction? What's the belief, the disbelief, the doubt? Is this really happening? And getting to know and trust the other is beginning to unfold there. And it's interesting within this particular story that Aslan gives Jill signs to relay back to Eustace that he was going to give to Eustace, but has to entrusting to Jill. And what I love about the nuance there is it's like C.S. Lewis is really getting at, like, yeah, rules are important, but faith shouldn't be reduced to a list of rules or a bunch of purity laws. That it's really these signs of being drawn into discerning and learning and figuring out how to direct our lives. And it's interesting to me that the fourth gospel, Gospel of John, that within that gospel, the author doesn't call miracles. The author calls them signs. Right? It's not just miracles for miracles' sake. They're signs pointing to something else, beyond a greater truth, a greater love that we're being drawn into. And so I love how C.S. Lewis brings up that theology of signs of discernment, listening. And it's not like, oh, you break this rule, bad things are going to happen. It's like when you journey, there's going to be signs along the way that I want you to pay attention to,
Right.
and this is going to help you on your journey. And so it points to a larger truth that we're a part of, a larger narrative that we're a part of. And so, man, just right at the get go, I was like, yeah, here we go. There's signs along the way, almost like a Pilgrim's Progress kind of version that he has. But as the journey goes along, what's going to happen? What's the mystery? What drives you into the story is, are they going to see the signs or not? And then us on the outside looking in, going, no, don't miss it. There it is, right. Kind of thing. And we do with our friends, our relationships all the time.
Right. And for those that haven't read the book, A, go read the book. But B, that's, Aslan positions all of this in a way of like, the air is clearest up here. This is where you will clearly hear the message and all of that. As you go in and go through this, it's going to get muddied along the way. Try not to get confused and all of that. And that's why he has her repeat the signs over and over and over again until she can just say them, until she knows them. And that the fact that in this, C.S. Lewis is positioning that to happen, but then writes a fallible character enough to okay, so these things happen and they have stakes, and that is what also then positions, because by this point we've already seen Aslan come in and they are falling off of a cliff and Aslan breathing and whisking them to safety. So we are seeing that along the way, Aslan's going to be stepping in and going to be, providing the signs, even though as humans, we get confused. This is where we stumble, and this is where we need grace and all of that. And the beauty in all of this is if you take the individual components, you can build an edible dish out of individual components, but it's not actually the recipe. And if you take all of this as as you read through and take in this story, you're seeing you're seeing along the way things play out as they, not how they seem like they would. And you see the human characters struggle and have to rely on, that faith piece comes in and all of that. And it's human, because you don't, while it is pointing to, an ultimate hero, it's there's still beats along the way that prove that there are stakes to be had, and still there is a hero, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think as you journey and as you're entrusted with these signs along the way, they're not doing it alone. They're in relationship with one another. They're sent people to help them along the way, to help them see clearly. And yeah, there's people also along the way who will confuse things. Kind of a sly-tongued snake, if you will, that will get in the way. But this isn't, as they travel down, and even literally, from up high when the air is clear, going down to an underland where things are very unclear and dark, you have people along with you in the journey. And that's, to be honest, that's what we're doing with systematic geology, right? We're journeying through life together and talking about the narratives we love and what we geek out on, but also trying to lift each other up and point to a greater truth and help us be the people that God is calling us to be in life. So, and that's why this book is almost a parable in itself that reveals that truth as they go along.
And when you talk about actively walking with God, get into what that actually looks like, and kind of the extent that is capable and all of that. It's there are non-negotiables that have to also go along with that if you're going to have that in authenticity. And the fact that it gets complicated, that's one of them. It's not just a matter of your giants will be slayed. It's a matter of sometimes you're going to need to learn how to get back up from your giants and all of that kind of stuff. And and the 3 and 4 dimension of being able to speak to that while also stating in a resolutory kind of way what that looks like, what that what that is, and all of that it is okay that it's going to be messy and imperfect and all of those kinds of things, that it's just something that I can appreciate, something that in an authentic and godly way is trying to give hope. I understand it's not specifically a Christian book. I get it. But it's C.S. Lewis that we're talking about here. You know what I mean?
Right.
The story is what it is. And so yeah, I mean, I think that hope is not universally good if also colored by things that are not true or what have you. I think that's problematic, but I can always appreciate something that's trying to push for something that is authentically generating of hope and allows for people to be able to explore in a particular direction that they're not going to be disappointed from. You know what I mean?
Right.
That it points in something that's authentically hopeful, because here's the reality, right? We can't, it's not, hope is not something that is readily, offered by the world and all of that. And so, yeah, there's Let Me Up. There's always, some fun to be had and all of that. There's levity outside of just things that point to Christian concepts. But hope and levity are two different things. I look to any number of fandoms that we've talked about or that we haven't talked about yet that are all levity. That's all good. Just there's a difference between something that's levity and something that's actively pointing to truth.
Yeah, or you take hope and you try and make it a commodity that you're gonna sell or profit off of. It's like, oh, that's trending, and people tend to like that, so I'm gonna try to monetize it or make it a commodity or something like that. And it's like, nope, there's deeper things here with that. And I think that's kind of what C.S. was getting at with this story is. As you journey along and as you meet friends along the way, what are those authentic relationships? And the quest we're on is to free those who are bound by those things that weigh you down or enslave you, and the release of the oppressed, as Jesus preached in his first sermon in Luke. Like that, those things are what we're called to, and yeah, what signs are we going to pay attention to along the way, and then helping one another see that sometimes those signs can be unclear and try to point you in the right direction.
Yeah. So this serves as, depending on how you read this, this can serve as the penultimate story for Narnia. One left after this, and that's the last battle. And so,
yeah. And as the old school guy, I got to say the original numbering, the legacy numbers, it was originally book 4. So right after Voyage of the Dawn Treader, it leads right into Eustace. But I understand chronological order and why it's number 6, but it's always going to be number 4. To me.
It's interesting because our particular generation can speak to what it looks like multiple times over when somebody from a different generation picks up and continues, and there's legacy where like prequels and trying to recontextualize certain parts of the story and all of that. And we've seen it to varying success. I'm not, but that's going to be dependent on who you ask.
Yeah.
But you got to give it to C.S. Lewis that either way that you read this, it works. Like they work as prequels. They work as a chronological set as well, and
Right.
that is talent. That is something special when you can when something can boast being able to do that. You've got that's the mark of a good storyteller, and that's a fond thing that I will always look at C.S. Lewis for. That he, we talk about to varying ends when an IP has a message. We've seen that done really, really well. We've seen that done really, really poorly. Take your pick, whatever. But it's something. It's always going to have a soft spot in my heart when somebody can also just tell me a good story. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that this serving as as the step before the end, I can appreciate, where this sits in the story from either direction.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Yep.
So yeah, this is, as we bring this thing in for the wrap up, this is one of those that I would suggest interacting with this. If you've never, depending on your, if you are more leaning towards allowing questions to be asked and being freer with that idea and all of that, and you've never read the Narniad before, this could be an entry point. Is it the most, succinct from a storytelling standpoint? No, but the quality of story is such that it's a very good jumping on point to be able to understand a bit of who Aslan is, what Aslan's country is, what Narnia is, all of that, where, then you can get into the full story as a whole. But this is one of those that if you are given to asking questions, then do yourself the favor of treating yourself to this, because it's a safe place to be introduced to some questions that then workshop, then actually ask, and all of that kind of stuff. But it's an entry point to this idea of eternality from the point of view of the thing that stands in contrast to the infinite sort of thing. Like it allows for that, and then also on top of it starts to beg the question, how does that impact the relationships that we have? That how does this one relationship, and let me tell you something, pulling the curtain back for a minute, as somebody who pastors people, who walks with people, who shepherds people, all of those kinds of things, and I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say this to you, conveying that idea of the relationship impacting your day-to-day relationships, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the sauce. Conveying that is something that's absolutely life-changing. And so yeah, I am going to appreciate it from wearing that hat, that's kind of that kind of thing is addressed at least to some layer in this with tact and eloquence. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's not. I don't think it's not by coincidence that the 10 Commandments, the first 3 deal with our relationship with God, and then the rest deal with others. So you start off with no other gods, don't take the Lord's name in vain, and then the Sabbath day, and all that is wrapped around nurturing a relationship with God, and then everything else flows from that with our parents and our neighbor, and how our relationship to possessions and all those things are entangled with one another. And so I think that's why these stories that C.S. Lewis writes in Narnia is that he portrays that truth of the importance of relationships and how they're all interconnected and entangled with one another. So how one reacts to Aslan, the signs and those along the way, and kind of like this fishnet that they pull behind them and what they carry with them is very, very important. And yeah, it's just a fantastic story. Again, yeah, there's those moments where it's kind of archetypes of like, yeah, there's a villain and there's a mystery, and then you're freeing somebody, and you feel like he's told this story before in other books, but when you have new characters introduced and their personalities, it shows in a different way, which doesn't make it stale or something you're bored with. It just illumines again how he's a master at lifting up these themes of a call story, forgiveness, redemption, freedom. Those themes are all there through the lens of these new characters in Narnia.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's where I think we for time memoriam we were talking about this a little bit before we hit record about the fact that Netflix currently owns the rights to the movies, to producing the movies, and there's talk of a full-on series that they're going to do, and kind of dreamcasting that a little bit and having those kinds of conversations. But you look at when this movie or when these books were written, and you look at how they were written and the order they were written and the concepts that they tackle and all of that kind of stuff, there is a reason why these are still considered within the pantheon of some of the best as far as literary works, and they still have a place in the conversation and all of that kind of stuff. I think and this is my own personal 2 cents, I would wager that the closer that you get to telling authentic truth, the more staying power you're going to have, because it reflects that core truth. And especially when you are talking about the a storyteller the caliber of C.S. Lewis, it's a no-brainer to think that these things would have the kind of staying power that they do.
Yeah, that resonate. Whatever resonates with you, that the reason it's timeless, not lifeless. It's full of life. It's timeless, that it carries across many generations, is because the themes resonate with what all humans wrestle with. And I'm waiting for, they make the Silver Chair into a movie and they throw it up on Netflix, and then you're going to have all those message boards be like, why are they copying J.K. Rowling's? Because there's like an owl, and there's a snake, and there's a witch, and there's puddle gum, and all these characters. Why are they copying Harry Potter? And like, no, this was first. J.K. Rowling's got the ideas and themes from other folks, and we're out, no one's inventing anything new. It's nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes says. So we're all building off each other's stuff. But yeah, this one was first. There's themes in here that was like, oh yeah, I'm reminded this came way before some of those big characters in Harry Potter and other works that I'm seeing on Netflix for fantasy genres.
Yeah. All right. So as we bring this thing in for a landing, let the people know what you have been geeking out on and what recommendations you have for everybody.
Yeah, I my summer was so nuts, and then getting ready for the new school year and new season here at the church. I'm so far behind on my comic list and books, but I have been enjoying rereading these books for the episodes here on systematic ecology, and can't recommend we go back and read them. And their quick reads are not super hard. They're YA in terms of level of the story they're telling, but it resonates. It's good. And then I know I mentioned this on other discussions with Narnia, but man, go check out the movie Shadowlands, which is a book about C.S. Lewis, and a movie about C.S. Lewis and him wrestling with the problem of pain and all that kind of stuff. It's not necessarily a full biography or biopic, but it is there. Anthony Hopkins plays C.S. Lewis. It's pretty good. Go find it and watch it.
Yeah, I watched that after the first Narnia episode that we did, and that you mentioned it there. And yeah, it is very good.
It's pretty good. It holds up.
Yeah. I have been, Sandman came out on Netflix, and I decided to download it and watch it, and boy, oh boy, is it phenomenal. I am a huge...
You like it? So I haven't seen it. That's on my list because I'm way behind. It's there sitting in my queue. I can't wait to go down that road, but I was curious what your thoughts were, what others in our community think of Sandman right now. Because I've read some of the graphic novels and know of it, but the series holds up.
I think as somebody who is a huge Neil Gaiman fan, I think that this is a take that gets what Neil Gaiman was going for, and I think that this is a very good portrayal. And I think some of the there's been a couple of oddball things like at surface level from some of the outspoken people that are taking random exception to random things. But like anybody who heard any of that, ignore the nonsense and just strap in for some storytelling. And it is, if you are a Neil Gaiman fan, then I would absolutely suggest it.
Nice. Quick question. Sorry, did you ever watch Good Omens? Did you watch Good Omens?
I did not.
You didn't. We like that one too. That's Neil Gaiman. But yeah, it's on my list. I can't wait to get it. Now you made me more hyped for it, and that's what we do here. We make recommendations, and then we're like, can't wait to go see what we recommend. Go check it out.
Yeah. And honestly, if you hear all of that and you're like, man, I've never read Sandman and the original run and what Neil Gaiman did, do yourself the favor, because there's a reason why that man changed how the medium of graphic storytelling is how that's actually taken and processed. The dude changed the game with what he wrote. Yep. So do yourself the favor.
Absolutely.
So that's a wrap for this stop in the Narnia retrospective. If you are finding yourself just absolutely in need of more Narnia goodness, we are doing a whole bunch of C.S. Lewis related content over at patreon.com/systematicgeekology. Help us keep the lights on and be able to hear us cut it up about the movies, talk about some of the differences between, Lord of the Rings, Narnia, all of that. We're also going to be covering the space trilogy later on this year. So you'll be able to find all of that and more over there. But until next time, guys, remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.